That's not a father, that's trash. The room didn't laugh. The room held its breath. 500 guests at a country club in Carmel, Indiana, on a Saturday in June, frozen with their cocktails halfway to their mouths, staring at the man in worn Levis and a button-up shirt from a consignment store on Walnut Street, who was standing alone next to a buffet table holding a brown paper bag with a wedding gift inside it. The man was my father. The man who had said trash was my future father-in-law. His name was Trevor Brixton. He was 62 years old. He owned the largest commercial real estate firm in Indianapolis. He was wearing a navy blazer that cost $3,000 and a Patek Philippe watch that cost $47,000. He had been drinking bourbon since 2:30 in the afternoon. He was standing in the middle of the cocktail hour at his daughter's wedding, in the middle of his own country club, in front of 500 guests he had personally invited, and he had just called my father trash. My fiancée Sloane was standing 6 feet away from him. She had her hand over her mouth. She was smiling. I was standing across the room, my chest was burning, and I was about to do something I had never done before in my life. My name is Cole Vandermeer. I am 34 years old. I own a custom motorcycle shop in Indianapolis with my best friend Thomas Riedel. We started it in 2015 with my own savings of $43,000 and Tommy's $21,000. Last year, we did $940,000 in revenue. We have 4 employees. We pay them well. We work hard. We make beautiful machines. That is the life I built. My father is Wendell Vandermeer, 64 years old, born in 1962 in a farm town outside Greencastle, Indiana. He has driven the same truck for 16 years. He buys his jeans at Tractor Supply. He fixes his own brakes. He cuts his own hair. He lives in a 2-bedroom ranch house on a county road outside Greencastle that he bought in 1989 for $68,000 and has never moved out of. He has a vegetable garden. He has a dog named Chester. He drinks Folgers coffee out of a mug my mother gave him in 1996 that says, "World's Okayest Dad." My father has worked at the steel office his entire adult life. That is what he has always called it. The steel office. He drives there at 6:15 in the morning. He drives home at 6:15 in the evening. He has never invited me to visit. I have never once seen the inside of the building. When I was 11, I asked him what he did at work. He said, "I help make the steel that holds up things, bridges, buildings, big machines." I said, "Cool." When I was 16, I asked, "Dad, are we rich?" He looked at me for a long moment. He said, "Cole, we have what we need. That is the same thing as rich for a man who knows what enough is." I said, "Okay." I never asked again. For 34 years, I believed my father was a good man with a steady paycheck who had loved my mother before she died of pancreatic cancer when I was 9, and who had raised me alone afterward in a house with 1 bathroom and a vegetable garden. I was right about the kind of man he was. I was wrong about everything else. I just did not know it yet. My mother died on November 14th, 2000. I was 9. Her name was Susan. She was 38. From diagnosis to funeral was 4 months. She died at home in the ranch house on the county road outside Greencastle, with my father holding her hand and me sitting on the floor next to the bed, because nobody had told me I could not sit on the floor. My father did not cry at the funeral. He cried for the first time 8 days later, when he was making me pancakes and the pancakes stuck to the pan, and he sat down at the kitchen table and put his face in his hands. I climbed into his lap. He said, "Cole, I'm going to be your dad and your mom now. I will mess it up sometimes. I want you to tell me when I do." I said, "Okay, Dad." He raised me alone for the next 25 years. He coached my little league. He taught me to weld. He taught me to change my own oil. He taught me to handle a difficult conversation by listening more than I talked. He never raised his voice. He never owned a sport coat. He never bought himself anything that did not last. That was the man Trevor Brixton called trash in front of 500 people on the day his daughter was supposed to marry me. I met Sloane Brixton at a charity bike auction in Carmel in April of 2024. I had donated a 1978 Triumph Bonneville we had restored over 6 months. Reserve was $8,000. It went for $14,000. The buyer walked over to me afterward. Black dress, brown hair, a careful smile that I would later understand had been practiced. She said, "I'm Sloane Brixton. I bought your bike." I said, "I noticed." She asked me about the engine. I talked for 15 minutes. She listened. I introduced her to my father a month later, at the diner outside Indianapolis where my dad and I had been having Sunday breakfast since I was 8. My father ordered eggs over medium. He shook Sloane's hand. He asked her 2 questions. The first was, "Sloane, what do you love?" She said, "My family, my career, the way Indianapolis looks in the fall." He nodded. The second was, "Sloane, what do you owe?" She said, "I'm not sure I understand the question." My father said, "Some things have a price tag. Other things have a debt that is not denominated in money. Things you owe because someone else paid the price for you. I'm asking what you owe in that kind of currency." She thought for a long time. She said, "Honestly, Mr. Vandermeer, I'm not sure I've thought about it that way before." In the parking lot afterward, my father turned to me. He said, "Cole, she'll do whatever her family expects of her. Make sure you know what they expect before you decide." I said, "Dad, she's not like that." He said, "Cole, some people are who you see. Some people are what they were taught. The trick is figuring out which one you've got before you give them your name." I drove home. I did not think much about the conversation. I should have. I met the Brixtons 6 weeks later at their estate in Carmel. 6 bedrooms, 3-car garage, a circular driveway with a fountain. Trevor opened the door in a navy blazer. He looked at my work boots. He said, "Cole, Sloane has told us so much about you." Petra Brixton, his wife, did not turn around when I walked into the kitchen for 45 seconds. Caleb Brixton, Sloane's 28-year-old brother, did not look up from his phone when I extended my hand. At dinner, Trevor said, "Grace." He thanked God for the visitors who join us tonight. Visitors. Trevor turned to me. He said, "Cole, Sloane tells me you have a little motorcycle hobby." I said, "It's my business, sir. We did $940,000 in revenue last year." Trevor said, "Adorable. What's the exit strategy?" I said, "There's no exit strategy. I love the work. I plan to do it for the next 40 years. Trevor laughed. It was not a friendly laugh. Petra pulled me aside in the hallway after dinner. She said, "Cole, we were hoping you'd have something more substantial by now. Sloane was raised to expect, well, you understand." I said, "Mrs. Brixton, I support myself with my hands. That's the manner I was taught." She patted my arm. She said, "That's lovely, Cole. We can work with that." I drove home that night and called Tommy. I said, "Tommy, I just had a meeting where I was being interviewed for a job I did not apply for." Tommy was quiet for a long time. He said, "Brother, watch carefully." I introduced my father to the Brixtons in August. Wendell drove up from Greencastle in the F-150. He wore his jeans. He carried a $14 bottle of wine from the Greencastle Kroger. Trevor took my father's hand after a 2-second delay. He shook it once. He let it drop. Caleb walked into the dining room. He looked at my father. He said, "Hey, are you the help? Did Sloane forget to tell us the catering was coming?" The room froze. I started to stand up. My father put his hand on my arm. He said quietly, "Son, I'm Cole's father. My name is Wendell." Caleb said, "Oh, sorry, man." He sat down. He did not say sorry like he meant it. After dinner, my father walked out to his truck. I walked with him. He said, "Cole, I'm only going to say this one time. People show you who they are. Don't argue with the showing. They showed me tonight. I'm going to drive home now." He drove off. I went back inside. Sloane put her arms around my neck. She said, "I'm so sorry. They just don't know your father yet." I said, "Sloane, they didn't try." She said, "Give them time. Daddy tests everyone. He tested me." I said, "Did he test the men your sister married?" She was quiet. She said, "She didn't marry. She's still single." Said, "Right." I should have left that night. I did not. The next 8 months were a slow erosion I did not see while it was happening. Sloane suggesting I take some classes. Public speaking, wine pairing, etiquette, Trevor offering me a job at Brixton Commercial Properties, Vice President of Facility Relationships, 6 figures, a corner office. He said, "Cole, we can make you presentable." I said no 4 times. By the 4th, I understood it was not an answer he was prepared to accept. Petra took control of the wedding planning in February. The venue was the estate at Sunset Hills in Carmel. The guest list was 500 people, 90% of whom I had never met. The total budget was $310,000. Trevor paid for all of it. He said, "Cole, this is our wedding for our daughter. You contribute the man, that's the deal." In April, I overheard Sloane on the phone with her mother. The bedroom door was almost closed. She did not know I was home. She said, "Mom, he'll come around. I know it's frustrating. He's malleable. Daddy was right about that. He'll be presentable by next year. We just have to be patient." She was talking about me. I drove to Tommy's house. I told him. Tommy said, "Cole, end it, tonight." I said, "The wedding is in 8 weeks." Tommy said, "Cole, the wedding being in 8 weeks is the worst possible reason to not end it tonight." I slept on it. I told myself she had been talking to her mother and people say things to their mothers they do not mean. I told myself love was about staying through the hard parts. I was wrong. 2 months later, on June 14th, on the lawn of a country club in Carmel, the woman I was about to marry stood at the bar with her family and laughed at my father. And I finally understood. Let me show you exactly what I saw between 3:38 and 4:47 on the afternoon of my wedding day. I want you to feel every minute of it. My father pulled into the parking lot at 3:30 in his 2009 Ford F150. He was wearing the worn Levis he had owned since 1998, the year before my mother got sick, and the consignment store button-up he had bought for the occasion, and the same brown work boots he wore to church. He was carrying a wedding gift in a brown paper bag, a leather wallet from the Greencastle hardware store. $90. He had picked it out because he thought it would last 50 years. I met him in the parking lot. I hugged him. He smelled like he always smelled, like soap and gasoline and the cheap aftershave my mother had bought him in 1997. He said, "Cole, are you ready for this?" I said, "Dad, I think so." He looked at me for a long moment. He said, "Cole, I'm going to ask you one question. I want you to give me one honest answer. After that, we walk in." I said, "Okay." He said, "Are you marrying her because you love her? Or are you marrying her because you don't know how to back out of a wedding the Brixtons have already paid for?" I sat with that. I said, "Dad, I don't know." He said, "That's an honest answer. Let's see what the day shows us." We walked across the gravel lot together at 3:35. Trevor Brixton saw us through the cocktail lounge window at 3:36. He said something to the 3 other men at the bar with him. The 4 men looked at my father. The 4 men laughed. The mockery began at 3:38. A waiter walked past my father with a tray of champagne. My father reached for a glass. The waiter stopped. He looked at my father's clothes. He looked at the bar. He said, "Sir, the champagne is for guests of the family." My father said, "I am the father of the groom." The waiter looked at the bar again. The waiter looked back at my father. The waiter said, "I'm sorry, sir, I just need to confirm with my manager." The waiter walked away. The waiter did not come back. My father did not get a glass of champagne. I watched this from across the room. My chest started to burn. Petra walked up to my father at the buffet at 4:08. She had Sloane on her arm. She said in a voice that carried, "Wendell, the buffet is for the cocktail hour. I just want to make sure you understand it's not the dinner. The dinner is in the main hall, plated." My father said, "I understand." Petra said, "We're seating the family party at table 1. You'll be at table 37, near the bar. We thought you'd be more comfortable there. The other gentlemen at that table are also, well, you'll all have a lovely time." She walked away. Sloane walked away with her. Sloane glanced back over her shoulder. She caught my eye. She covered her mouth with one hand. She was laughing. My father set his plate down on a cocktail table. He did not eat. He stood next to the table, alone. I started walking across the room. A guest stopped me. An older man, Trevor's golf partner. He said, "Cole, congratulations, big day." By the time I got past him, my father was being approached again. This time by Caleb. Caleb had his phone in his hand. He was filming. He said, loudly enough for the bar to hear, "Hey, Dad of Cole, quick question. We're putting together a family memory video for the reception. Would you be willing to share a few words about the bride? I'm filming candid right now if that works." My father said, "Caleb, I have not been introduced to your sister in a meaningful way. I do not have words about her. I have words about my son. Would those work?" Caleb said, "Yeah, never mind, we don't need that." Caleb walked away. He turned the phone toward Trevor at the bar instead. Trevor was watching. Trevor was grinning. Trevor said something to the camera. The bar laughed. My father stood alone again. I started moving across the room again. This time, another guest stopped me. A woman in a Chanel suit. She said, "Cole, Sloane has told me so much about you. Tell me about your little motorcycle business." My father, on the other side of the room, was being approached by the wedding photographer. The photographer said something to my father. My father shook his head. The photographer walked away. I would learn later that the photographer had been instructed to pose the family photos without my father in them. I was 3 feet from him when Trevor stepped in front of me. Trevor was holding a fresh bourbon. He had been drinking for 2 hours. He was loud now. He was at the volume of a man who wants every person in a room to hear him. He said, "Wendell, come here, my man, come over." He reached out and clapped my father on the shoulder. He turned toward the bar, toward his 3 friends, toward the room. He said, "Folks, I want to introduce you to someone. This is Cole's father. Wendell, real working man, doesn't even own a sport coat. Look at this guy, real America, salt of the earth." Trevor's 3 friends laughed. Petra appeared at Trevor's side. She had her arm linked through his. She was smiling. She said, in a voice that filled the room, "Honey, look at his clothes. Are those from 1990? They're vintage." 3 more guests laughed, then more, then more. Then half the cocktail hour was laughing. My father said quietly, "Mr. Brixton, you are drunk. You are mocking me in front of your friends. I am asking you to stop." Trevor did not stop. Trevor turned to face the room. He raised his bourbon. He said, in a voice that carried into every corner of that country club, "Wendell, here, this man, he's not a father, he's trash, and we love him for it. Salt of the earth, real America." The room held its breath. I was 12 feet away. I could see Sloane standing 6 feet from her father. Her hand was over her mouth. She was smiling. Then she lowered her hand. She was laughing. She was laughing at my father. The woman I was about to marry was laughing at my father in front of 500 people while her father called him trash. I will tell you what happened in my head at that exact moment. I will tell you because I want you to understand what a man feels when he watches the people who claim to love him show him exactly who they are. I felt rage. I felt a clarity I had not felt in 14 months. I felt every warning my father had given me about the Brixtons, every quiet observation Tommy had made, every "she's malleable" I had overheard, every dismissive look from Petra, every test I had passed without realizing I was being tested at all. And I felt, finally, the question my father had asked me in the parking lot 15 minutes earlier. Are you marrying her because you love her? Or are you marrying her because you don't know how to back out of a wedding the Brixtons have already paid for? I knew the answer now. I had always known the answer. I had just been too scared to say it. I walked past Trevor. I climbed the 3 steps to the dais. I picked up the microphone. I tapped it once. The string quartet stopped playing. The room turned. 500 faces. I said, "This wedding is over." The room went silent. Trevor's drink hand froze halfway to his mouth. Petra's smile died on her face. Sloane took 2 steps toward me. She started to say something. She stopped. I looked at Sloane. I looked at Trevor. I looked at Petra. I looked at Caleb, who was still filming. I looked at the 500 guests who had been laughing 30 seconds earlier. And in the silence, in the corner near the buffet, my father set down the brown paper bag with the leather wallet inside it. He started walking toward the dais. He climbed the 3 steps. He stood beside me. He put one hand on my shoulder. He leaned in close. And in a voice nobody else in that room could hear, my father said 6 words that I had waited 34 years to hear without knowing I had been waiting. "Son, I'm a billionaire. I've got this." My mind went blank. $43,000 saved over 3 years to buy half of Pop Henderson's shop, a ranch house on a county road in Greencastle, a 2009 F-150, Tractor Supply jeans, a consignment store shirt. We have what we need. That is the same thing as rich for a man who knows what enough is. A father who left at 6:15 every morning and came home at 6:15 every evening for 25 years, who had never told me what he actually did at the steel office, who had let me work at Henderson's, who had let me save my own money, who had let me struggle, who had watched me struggle. I looked at my dad. His face was calm. His eyes were the same eyes they had been when he had been making me pancakes the morning after my mother's funeral. He took the microphone gently out of my hand. He patted my shoulder. He turned to face 500 people. And he ended the Brixton family in 7 minutes. He said, "Good evening. My name is Wendell Vandermeer. I am Cole's father. I would like, with my son's permission, to address the room." He looked at me. I nodded. I could not speak. He continued, "For those of you who do not know me, I am the founder, sole shareholder, and chairman of Vandermeer Materials Holdings. Our headquarters is in Indianapolis, 15 miles from this country club. We supply structural steel and rare earth materials to the construction, automotive, and aerospace industries. As of the most recent valuation, our company is worth approximately $2.3 billion. The room did not breathe. I watched Trevor's face change, slowly, inch by inch. I watched Petra's smile die a second time, deeper than the first. I watched Sloane go the color of paper. I watched the 3 friends at the bar set their drinks down. My father continued, "Mr. Brixton, you have spent the last hour mocking my clothing, my truck, my wallet, my son. You have done this in front of 500 people. You have done it because you assumed I was a man of no consequence, and because you have spent your entire life confusing volume with importance." He paused. "I have not responded until now because I wanted to see whether my son would be the man his mother asked me to raise. He was. He just took the microphone and ended this wedding because he loves me more than he wanted to marry your daughter. I am very proud of him." He looked at me, then back at Trevor. "I am also going to share a piece of business news, in the interest of full disclosure. Your firm, Brixton Commercial Properties, has been negotiating a contract with my company for the past 18 months. The contract is for the supply of structural steel for the Carmel Riverwalk project. It was scheduled to be executed Monday morning. The contract is worth $34 million in revenue to your firm." Trevor's face had gone gray. My father was still calm. "During the 18-month negotiation, my legal and compliance team conducted standard due diligence on Brixton Commercial Properties, as is the standard for any vendor relationship of this size. What we found, Mr. Brixton, was that your firm has, over the past 4 years, structured at least 16 commercial real estate transactions in a way that appears to violate federal mortgage fraud and bank fraud statutes. We found inflated appraisals submitted to lenders. We found shell companies routing kickbacks to your wife's brother in Cleveland. We found 2 transactions in which your firm appears to have laundered approximately $6.8 million on behalf of a client whose source of funds we could not verify." The room had stopped breathing entirely. Petra grabbed Trevor's arm. Trevor did not look at her. He could not move. My father said, "I had intended to cancel the contract on Monday morning, on grounds of moral conduct of counterparties, and to forward our findings quietly to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Indiana. I was not going to embarrass anyone publicly. I was going to let the federal authorities handle it. That was the plan I had this morning when I drove up here in my truck." He paused. He looked at Trevor. "Your performance over the last hour, Mr. Brixton, has changed my plan. I want everyone in this room, every business associate, every client, every investor, every member of your country club, to know that as of Monday morning, the federal government will have a complete forensic file on your firm. I want everyone here who has done business with you to immediately review their exposure. I want everyone who has lent you money to call their attorneys tonight. I want everyone who has accepted your hospitality to understand that the man whose roof they have sat under is, in the considered opinion of my company's compliance team and the law firm we retained for this matter, a federal criminal. Trevor's bourbon glass slipped from his hand. It shattered on the parquet floor. Petra started crying. Caleb stopped filming. Sloane sank into a chair. My father said, "My chief of staff, Hadrian Crowley, is in this room. Hadrian, please raise your hand." A man in his late 50s at table 42 raised his hand. My father said, "Hadrian will deliver the formal contract notice to your home tomorrow morning. The federal filings will be made on Monday. I felt you should know publicly, in front of the same 500 people you invited here today, what has just happened to your firm and your family." He turned back to me. "Cole, I am going to drive home now. I have a long drive. I would like you to come with me." I nodded. I still could not speak. My father handed the microphone back to me. He walked down the steps of the dais. He walked across the silent room. He walked out the front doors of the country club. I stood on the dais alone for a moment. I had to say something. I picked up the microphone. My voice was steadier than I expected. I said, "My name is Cole Vandermeer. Most of you don't know me. I'm the groom, or I was." I looked at Sloane. I said, "Sloane, I owe you an apology, not for ending this tonight. I owe you an apology for asking you to marry me at all. I asked you to marry someone I was going to be, not someone I am. The man you have been planning to marry for the last 14 months is a project you and your family were going to finish. A working-class motorcycle mechanic you were going to polish into something presentable for your country club. I am not that project. I will never be that project. I should have told you that the night I overheard you on the phone with your mother in April calling me malleable. I am telling you now." I looked at Trevor. I said, "Mr. Brixton, my father just took $34 million from your firm and forwarded a federal criminal file on you to the U.S. attorney. He did this in 7 minutes. He did it because of what you said about my dad and what you've been planning to say about him for the last 6 months at country club lunches. I want you to know something about the man you called trash. The wedding gift my father carried into this venue is a leather wallet from the Greencastle hardware store. He spent $90 on it. He picked it out because he thought it would last 50 years. He was not embarrassed by the bag. He was not embarrassed by the price. He was not embarrassed by anything in this venue. The only person embarrassed at this wedding tonight, Trevor, is you." I looked at Petra. I said, "Mrs. Brixton, the man you laughed at tonight raised me alone after my mother died of pancreatic cancer when I was 9 years old. He worked 12-hour days for 25 years to teach me how to be a man. He never bought himself anything that did not last. You laughed at him because his clothes were old. Mrs. Brixton, his clothes are old because he loved my mother. Those are the clothes she helped him pick out before she died. He kept wearing them because he wanted her hands on his back every day for 25 years. You laughed at a man wearing his dead wife's last gift to him. I hope you remember that for the rest of your life." The room was completely still. Sloane was crying. Petra was crying. Trevor was sitting in a chair, staring at the broken glass at his feet. I walked off the dais. I walked across the room. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the engagement ring I had bought Sloane in December, a 1-carat solitaire I had paid for myself with money I had saved for 2 years. I walked up to Trevor. I dropped the ring on the table in front of him. I said, "Give it back to your daughter. Tell her I wish her well." I walked out the front doors of the estate at Sunset Hills. My father's F-150 was running in the parking lot. I climbed into the passenger seat. He pulled out of the lot. He drove. We drove for 15 minutes without talking. I looked out the window. The afternoon was clear, cornfields on both sides. I finally said, "Dad?" He said, "Yes, son." I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" He drove for a full minute before he answered. He said, "Cole, Your mother died on November 14th of 2000. You were 9 years old. The day before she died, when she could still talk, she said something to me. She said, "Wendell, don't let our boy grow up the way the rich boys grow up. Don't let him think his life was given to him. Make him earn it. He'll be a better man for it." I made her that promise. I kept it for 25 years. I am sorry if it cost you anything. I am not sorry I kept it. I sat with that. I said, "Dad, Mom was right." He said, "She usually was." We drove for another 10 miles. I said, "Dad, you let me work at Henderson's. You let me save up $43,000. You let me carry a mortgage on my apartment. You let me drive a 1998 truck. You let me struggle. You watched me struggle." He said, "Yes." I said, "Why?" He said, "Cole, there are two kinds of money in the world, the kind you earn and the kind you are handed. The kind you are handed makes some people grateful. It makes most people lazy. It made your mother's family lazy. Did I ever tell you about your mother's family?" I said, "No." He said, "Your mother's family had old money. Indianapolis money. Real estate from before the Depression. Your grandfather inherited $8 million. He spent 40 years drinking it down to 4. Your uncle inherited 2 and lost it on a horse farm in Kentucky. Your other uncle inherited 2 and lives in Florida on the interest, doing nothing. Your mother got out of that family the day she met me. She told me, a year into our marriage, that the worst thing my money could ever do to our son would be to let him become her brother's. She made me promise. She got sick. She made me promise again. I kept it." He drove. He said, "Cole, I watched you work for 3 years at Henderson's. I watched you save your money. I watched you buy half the shop. I watched you build that business with Tommy in your hands. I watched you become a man your mother would have been proud of. I have, in 25 years of being your father alone, never been more proud of you than I am right now, sitting in this truck, on the day you walked out of a wedding in front of 500 people because some rich man insulted me. That is the inheritance, Cole. The money is incidental. The man you became is the inheritance." I cried. I am 34 years old, and I sat in the passenger seat of my father's F-150 on State Road 421 between Carmel and Indianapolis, and I cried. He let me cry. He didn't say anything else. When I was done, I wiped my face with the back of my hand. I said, "Dad, I'm hungry. Can we stop somewhere?" He said, "Yeah, Cole. There's a diner up here in Whitestown. They make a meatloaf your mother would have appreciated." We stopped at the diner. We ate meatloaf. We talked about the Norton Commando we had been restoring. Then we drove home. Sunday morning, I drove to Pop Henderson's house. Pop was on his porch with his coffee. 71 years old. His hands shook a little when he held the cup. I sat down on the porch. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I was done, he set his cup down. He said, "Cole, I have known you since you were 21. You walked into my shop with grease on your hands. I gave you a job because I liked your hands and your eyes. I have known your father from a distance, for 10 years. I had no idea who he was. Doesn't matter. Cole, your father raised you to be a man who walks into a country club wedding, watches his father get insulted by some rich asshole who wishes he was important, and walks out without throwing a punch. That's the inheritance, son. The money is incidental. The man your father made you is the inheritance. Don't let anyone tell you anything different." I said, "Pop." He said almost the same words to me yesterday. Pop laughed. He said, "Cole, good men say the same things because the truth doesn't have that many sentences in it." He gave me another cup of coffee. I sat on his porch for an hour. Then I drove home. I want to tell you what happened to the Brixton family in the next 9 months. Hadrian Crowley delivered the formal contract notice to Trevor's home at 9:15 Monday morning. Trevor was not awake. Petra answered the door in a robe. The federal forensic file was forwarded to the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Indiana on Monday afternoon. The FBI opened an investigation into Brixton commercial properties within 3 weeks. Trevor was indicted in October on 12 counts of bank fraud, 4 counts of wire fraud, and 2 counts of money laundering. Petra was named as an unindicted co-conspirator on 3 of the bank fraud counts. Sloane was not charged with anything. Her name appeared once in the federal filing as the recipient of 3 quarterly distributions from a shell company her father had used to route kickbacks. She had not, the filing concluded, known the source of the funds. Trevor pled guilty in February to 9 of the 18 counts. He is serving 28 months at a federal correctional facility in Yankton, South Dakota. He will be released in June of 2028. Petra's brother Roland, who had been receiving the kickbacks, pled guilty in March. He is serving 34 months at the same facility. Petra filed for legal separation from Trevor in November. The Carmel mansion sold in January for $8.2 million to a hedge fund executive from Chicago. The proceeds went to Trevor's restitution fund. Caleb Brixton lost his job at the firm in July. He moved to Phoenix, Arizona in September. He has not, as far as I know, found permanent employment since. Sloane sent me 14 emails over the 6 months following the wedding. I read the first 3. The first was an apology. The second was a longer apology. The third was an explanation of how she had been raised to be loyal to her family above all else, and how she now realized that loyalty had been misplaced. I did not read the rest. In October, after the 8th email, I wrote her one response. I said, "Sloane, I hope you find peace. I will not be part of finding it for you. Goodbye." I never heard from her again. In February of 2026, Tommy and Elena had a baby, a daughter. They named her Susan, after my mother. I am her godfather. In March of 2026, my father donated $5 million to Indianapolis Tech, the trade school where I had gotten my motorcycle mechanic certification. The donation established the Susan Vandermeer Working Family Scholarship Fund. The scholarship pays full tuition and books for any student from Greencastle, Indiana, whose family income is below the median for Putnam County. The first scholarship was awarded in March. The recipient was a 17-year-old kid named Jalen Marquette, whose dad has worked at the Indianapolis stamping plant for 31 years. I drove to Greencastle for the announcement. I stood next to my father at the podium. He did not give a speech. He just shook Jalen's hand and said, "Son, the world needs more boys with their hands on machines. Welcome to the trade." It is now mid-April of 2026, 10 months since the wedding that ended in front of 500 people. I am 34 years old. I run my motorcycle shop in Indianapolis. Tommy and I have hired 2 more employees. We have a 6-month waiting list for custom builds. Last quarter, we did $340,000 in revenue. I bought a house in Indianapolis in February, a 3-bedroom Craftsman built in 1922 in the Fountain Square neighborhood. It needed a new roof, new plumbing, and new electrical. I have been doing the work myself in the evenings. My father drives over from Greencastle every other Sunday and helps me. He is a better electrician than I am. He says my mother taught him. In March, I started dating someone new. Her name is Hadley Marsh. She is 31 years old. She is a kindergarten teacher at an Indianapolis public school. We met at a coffee shop near the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in March. I was reading a service manual for a 1969 Norton Commando. She was grading kindergarten worksheets at the next table. She asked me what I was reading. I told her. She said, "I have always wanted to know how a motorcycle engine works." I said, "I can show you." She said, "Are you flirting with me?" I said, "I'm trying to." She said, "Buy me a coffee and try harder." I bought her a coffee. We have been on 6 dates since. She did not know who my father was for the first 6 weeks. When I told her the whole thing, the wedding, the contract, the federal indictment, the $2.3 billion, her response was, "Oh, okay, want to grab dinner?" I knew in that moment that I had found someone real. My father has met her twice. The first time, he asked her 2 questions, the same questions he asked Sloane. He asked, "Hadley, what do you love?" She said, 5-year-olds. The first hot day in May, my grandmother's pierogi recipe, Cole's hands when he's working on something. My father said, "Good." He asked, "Hadley, what do you owe?" She thought for a long time. She said, "Mr. Vandermeer, I owe my parents for working 3 jobs to send me to college. I owe my grandmother for teaching me what kindness looks like. I owe my students for trusting me to teach them. And I owe Cole in advance for being patient with me while I figure out what I am to him. I think those are all debts I'm trying to pay every day." My father looked at me. He looked back at Hadley. He said, "Hadley, you are going to be okay." He shook her hand. He drove home to Greencastle. Last week I drove out to Greencastle Cemetery to visit my mother's grave. It was a clear afternoon, the first warm one of April. I brought a small bouquet of carnations from the Kroger, because she always said carnations were the unfussy flower, and she did not like fussy. I sat down in the grass next to her stone. I said, "Hi, Mom." I said, "I just wanted to tell you that Dad kept his promise. He kept it for the whole 25 years. He kept it in front of 500 people last June. He kept it at a country club in Carmel that you would have hated. He kept it in his Levis from 1998 and the consignment store shirt. He stood up for me. He stood up for himself. And he made sure that the woman I almost married, and her family, and everyone who watched them mock him, would never forget what kind of man he is." I sat with that. I said, "Mom, I think he might be the best man I've ever known. I want you to know that I know it now. I'm sorry it took me 34 years. I sat in the grass for another 20 minutes. I drove home to Indianapolis. That night, my father came over for dinner at my new house. Tommy and Elena were there with the baby. Pop Henderson was there. Hadley was there. We made hamburgers in the backyard. My father grilled. He has always been the grill master. He flipped the burgers with a wooden spatula my mother bought in 1994 that he has never replaced. After dinner, my father stood up. He said, "I want to make a toast." We all stood up. My father raised his beer. He said, "To Susan, to the woman who raised me, to the woman who told me what kind of son to raise, to the woman who is in this room tonight whether we can see her or not, and to Cole, who became exactly the man she asked me to make." We drank. Hadley was holding my hand. The baby was asleep on Elena's shoulder. Tommy was crying. Pop was nodding. I looked at my dad. He looked at me. He said, "I love you, son." I said, "I love you, Dad." He sat down. He picked up his hamburger. He took a bite. He said, "Damn good hamburger." That is my life now. It is a good life. It is the life my mother asked my father to give me. It is the life he gave me. So let me ask you something. Have you ever watched the people who claim to love you mock the parent who raised you? Have you ever stood in a room and watched your fiancée smile while her family laughed at your father's worn jeans, his old truck, the consignment store shirt his dead wife helped him pick out before she died? Have you ever had to choose, in front of 500 people, between the woman you thought you were going to marry and the man who raised you alone after your mother died? I'm going to be honest, I made the choice in 7 seconds. From the moment I heard Trevor Brixton say, "That's not a father, that's trash," to the moment I picked up the microphone was 7 seconds. It should not have taken me 7 seconds. It should have taken me 0. It should have taken me, "Trevor, don't talk about my father like that." It should have taken me, "Sloane, why are you smiling?" It should have taken me, "I'm leaving." It took me 7 seconds because for 14 months I'd been telling myself a story about who Sloane was, about who her family was, about who I could become if I tried hard enough. And in 7 seconds all of that story burned down. What replaced it was the truth my father had been showing me my entire life. Sometimes the people who save your life are the people you live with every day and never really see. Sometimes the man in the worn jeans is worth more than the man in the navy blazer. By orders of magnitude. In every way that money cannot measure. If you have ever watched your father get mocked by people who thought they were better than him, I want to hear from you. If you have ever watched your fiancé's true face come out at a moment you could not unsee, if you have ever stood up in front of a room full of strangers and chosen the man who raised you over the family you were about to join, tell me what you did. Tell me what it cost you. Tell me what you found on the other side. I will read every comment. If this story moved you, send it to anyone who has been told their dad was not impressive enough. Send it to anyone whose father wears the same jeans he wore in 1998. Send it to anyone whose father has never once, in their lifetime, made a fuss about anything except the people he loves. Send it to your dad. Tell him you saw him. Tell him you know. Subscribe for more stories. I will see you next time.